before I move forward, I hope you do find something in that prayer that offers something to you. I think we all need some sort of refuge during this time of COVID and divided politics, and fear is in all of our lives, anxiety, struggles. And it's hard to find it in the world right now. I mean, we live in a very divided world, divided on ideologies, beliefs, political affiliations. And I use the word divided because I see a lot of people either saying or communicating in some way an us versus them message. Whether it's about vaccines, abortions, voting rights, so many things. The message is always, I know what's right and you're wrong. Even within Unitarian Universalism, there is division. During a conversation with Unitarian Universalist ministers this week, we talked about COVID and vaccine mandates and wondering about the Unitarian Universalist Association COVID guidelines. One guideline says, as a community that values inclusion and collective care, we don't want to create in-person situations that inadvertently exclude those at higher risk or create situations that force those at higher risk to publicly identify themselves. And yet there's another guideline. And this one says we support requiring vaccine mandates for staff, lay leaders, and anyone spending time with children. My friends, there is a passion among I think there's a passion among everyone about all these kinds of issues, but particularly right now as we as Unitarian Universalists explore these guidelines and how to use them to help keep people safe. Being more inclusive, requiring mandates. It's a perfect example of what is the difference between loose and tight group norms. Loose is more flexible, more open, more inclusive. Tight is more right or wrong, black or white, requiring, mandating. So how do these two norms coexist? As you heard earlier, Michele Gelfand, professor of psychology at the University of Maryland, wrote, my research has shown that some groups have stronger norms than others. They're tight. Others, much weaker norms. They're loose. Tight cultures have generally experienced a lot of threat, whether it is a high level of natural disaster, famine, resource scarcity. It makes sense because cultures that have had a real or perceived threat need rules to coordinate and to survive, or at least they feel they do. But cultures that don't have a lot of threat can afford to be more open, more permissive, more loose. And we know that threats need not be objective to cause groups to tighten. Her research has found that within minutes of exposing study participants to false information about terrorist incidents, overpopulation, pathogen outbreaks, and natural disasters, their minds tightened. They were afraid. They wanted more order, more safety. Loose cultures comparatively are more disorganized, but they are also more open to new ideas. They're more creative. People are open to new people joining them. And to being able to move, to change, to progress, to process. Tight cultures have much less openness. They're less creative, more ethnocentric, and have a great deal of cultural inertia. They also want stronger rules and punishments. COVID has created a lot of fear, as have other things in our culture. And I say that because, as a congregation, we are now carefully moving back toward in-person activities and worship, even though there is still this feeling, this fear, this anxiety, because we are in a threatening situation. It's normal. It's normal and natural for a tightening of norms for safety reasons. We're all wearing masks. But as Gelfand reminds us, we need to be careful. It is easy to be swayed toward a desire for too much tightening. And then where do our Unitarian Universalist ideals of inclusivity, flexibility, creativity, and openness go? That's not just true of Unitarian Universalist congregations. We are in a larger countrywide or worldwide struggle to figure out what the new balance is. And unfortunately, I see in the world groups using rationalization or conspiracy theories to support tightening or loosening norms. As I mentioned, I attended the Parliament of World Religions over the weekend, and I was surprised by some things. I learned a lot. It was great. But in one of the workshops I was in, I was surprised to hear one of the participants rail against the authoritarian regime of Canada and its vaccine mandates. And I'm sure you have been closely attending to the rejection of vaccine mandates for the people of Florida by our Governor DeSantis, who is citing freedom of choice as his rationale. I fear, as probably many of you do, that certain rationalizations and conspiracy theories are creating an us versus them environment. However, I will say that the creation of rationalizations and conspiracy theories are normal and natural defaults of a very human desire to explain situations we find ourselves in, threatening, particularly or anxiety-producing situations we find ourselves in. Situations that feel out of our control, beyond our understanding, difficult for us to put in some kind of box so that we can move on. Russell Johnson, professor at the Chicago Divinity School, wrote, Karl Popper, who helped popularize the term conspiracy theories, says that people gravitate toward conspiracy theories. First, because they want to feel that they can explain what is going on around them. This yearning for answers, however, can lead us astray, especially since cognitive bias makes us see agency and intentionality when there is none there. Second, studies have shown that people rely on conspiratorial thinking when they feel powerless. Third, when people take themselves to be in an us versus them conflict. Conspiracy theories help us reaffirm the group's goodness by placing blame for whatever on the opposing group for bad outcomes, even though the bad outcomes are not caused by them. We've seen this. We've seen this all around us right now. One common example of this us versus them and the loosening of the conspiratorial type of thinking, which unfortunately for a lot of folks tends to be on those who are on the losing end of things. A perfect example is the Stop the Steal chants. It's very typical of a losing side accepting conspiracy thinking. I know I'm spending a lot of time on conspiracy theories and rationalizations. They're the cousin of conspiracy theories. Because it's easy. It's easy for humans, including Unitarian Universalists, to demonize or otherize people who employ conspiracy theories or rationalizations. Thus, we tend to lack empathy and understanding for those who espouse them, not treating them with worth and dignity. And we must not go down that path. We do not have to believe what they believe, but we still need to treat them with compassion, empathy, understanding. We must not otherize them or demonize them. I'm going to take us back for a moment to the meeting I had with the clergy, the Unitarian Universalist clergy this week. We were discussing certain issues around COVID and in particular the guidelines, one mandating staff vaccines while the other fostering a community that values inclusion and a collective care, that we all care about each other. And while I can easily say that all the clergy present, including myself, 100% support getting a COVID vaccine, we were less clear on the balance of these two guidelines. Now, while I can inform you that all our staff are vaccinated, I wonder, what if one of our staff was not? That's the issue that was brought before these ministers as we got together, as we talked, ministers all across the country. Would we bring it to the board? Would we ultimately fire them? And how does that square with the values of inclusion and collective care? Who would be the collective then? Would we be creating an us versus them environment in our own faith community? Or maybe we would let the congregation know that a certain staff member is not vaccinated, so members and friends of that congregation could make their own choices about interaction with that person. Would we then need to talk about secondhand exposure? Or double down on masking and social distancing? Probably all of us agreed, most of us agreed, that we would go to the board for more clarity, our boards, that we would go to the UUA, the CDC, regarding vaccine mandates. We all struggled with, would we go back, if this were the case, to totally online programming? And there were some that wondered, perhaps I'll just do nothing at all. Or the board might say, perhaps we'll do nothing at all. and hope that no one found out. You know, when we are in this time of fear and anxiety and insecurity and not knowing exactly how to handle a situation that feels very much out of our control, we don't have clear ideas. We don't know exactly how to handle a situation. We do the best we can. And I would say to you all that what we face right now in this faith community, as well as communities of all kinds across this country, is very real, very important, very emotional, and can be very divisive. What if we had a member or a staff member here who chose to be unvaccinated? What would you choose to do if you had to make that decision? And what if the person sitting right next to you decided just the opposite? How would we manage that? I want to say that your board, your leadership, has had to set and thus tighten norms for this congregation, while being very much aware of the needs for inclusivity, openness, safety, and most importantly, community. I am truly grateful for the thoughtful and reasoned leadership of UU Miami as they've dealt with COVID, the COVID norms. And I am blessed, I am amazed, I am happy, joyful at the reasoned, flexible people on this board, their combined wisdom and the love that they have for this congregation as we struggle with this pandemic and its impact on all of us. Obviously, I don't want us to get into an us versus them argument about how we should handle COVID norms. I don't think that would serve anybody well. But there is always a risk of sliding into that mentality when some people want more safety or tightening of norms and others want more inclusivity or loosening of norms. As a community and as a person, I think we need to be very compassionate and understanding of each other and of ourselves as we each personally make decisions about how to handle safety, intimacy, our physical connections with each other, whether it be touching or handshaking or hugging or our elbows or distancing, or how we eat with one another. Everybody's going to feel a different amount of comfort as we sit outside today and eat our box lunches. Some people will feel more comfortable sitting further away, some people not. And one area that is certainly true is that people attending our worship services on Sunday morning, some feel more comfortable or are dealing with that anxiety in a way that allows them to be here, and others are not. And we still need to be community. We still need to show compassion. We still need to be aware that each person is in a different place, and to respect that place that they are. We are not in an easy time for norming right now. We have to be willing to be in a process of norming. With new information from the CDC or the Unitarian Universalist Association, from experts as well as members and friends of this faith community. being in process doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel grounded, doesn't feel stable, doesn't feel like a refuge. We're constantly looking for the Goldilocks of tight and loose norms. And if we go too far in one direction or the other, there are problems. Extremely tight groups can feel very oppressive. But extremely loose groups have little or no way to coordinate how we should be with one another. And to add to that mix, as we think about cultural norms, we also need to be aware of anti-racism, our white supremacy culture. Being aware, what I mean by that is being aware of the impact of these norms on people, the emotional impact. We know that women and minorities and other marginalized groups live in tighter worlds. There is less latitude, and some are punished more severely for violations than their counterparts, their white, particularly male counterparts. Being aware of the impact on certain groups of people, on certain people, should also be an important aspect of how we set norms as a faith community. We need to take into account our commitment to more anti-racist, anti-oppressive thinking, and realizing that each person is different with different needs, experiences, and feelings. As norms are set and as they change, there will be times we need to stop, make a space for reflection, make a space for us to be with one another, to express what we feel, what the impact has been on us. And I have to say that I'm sorry for myself that we haven't made that space for reflection yet. But I do want to acknowledge that we need to. Because these norms are not going to be set in stone, that we're going to continue to have to be in process. We don't know what next week's COVID situation is going to be, or how it's going to impact someone, or how safe someone's going to feel, or how isolated and disengaged someone will feel. Or really how someone might need us, their faith community, in this difficult time. I don't know how long COVID's going to be with us. I don't know what the world's going to look like next week or next year. We're all going to continue to experience its impact. After this year and a half, I know that I'm feeling more vulnerable, more easily exhausted, more overwhelmed, distressed, depressed, anxious. I know that some of my own personal norms tighten and loosen with hourly, sometimes daily. Do I shake a hand? Do I touch an elbow? How do I deal with people in the grocery store? We each are struggling. I believe that. I believe that each of you also are trying to figure out what your personal norms are. Living in a world where norms are changing in different places, wherever we are. Our homes, our condominium complexes, our work, so many places. And I guess I want to say to you this, In this shifting of norms in this time as we continue to struggle with COVID, I think many of us are just becoming so exhausted by the continuation of this process. We've just reached our limits in many ways. We see it in people reacting violently and getting depressed and isolating, not because of COVID, but because they can't cope. It's overwhelming. And I want to say personally to you that if you want to talk about these shifting norms, about how you're coping, please call me, let me know, I'll email me, we'll set up a time and talk. Or talk to anyone here. We're here for each other. We can't do this alone. I don't believe we can do this alone. This is why this community is here. My concern for us is that this tightening and loosening process will continue to impact how we feel about ourselves, each other, our friends and family, about even this faith community. At times we will choose to withdraw, to cope. Sometimes we will resist to cope. But ultimately, I hope we find a way forward together, supporting one another. And that this faith community is a space where we will together make an effort in whatever way we can to embrace both safety and inclusivity, with love and compassion, with an awareness and a willingness at times just to be with one another in whatever way we can, virtually or in person or however we can. Acknowledging we do not have the answers about what will come next, but we are together on this journey. And that we will be together on this journey, whatever is next. And that we can be a refuge of compassion, of caring, of love, of understanding for one another on this journey.